for the Office of Internal Audit. The Office of Internal Audit is aware that 2 district administrators have been or are currently under investigation for falsification of free and reduced lunch applications. The internal auditor has requested access to information that will allow the Office of Internal Audit to complete a special review of the overall verification process with specific emphasis of reviewing applications that have information that match the district human resources records, so we can compare, if any of the information in the free and reduced files match our employees. The internal auditor is currently unable to perform this review because of the scope limitation. Because these are federal rather than state laws, regulations, the district is seeking clarification and an opinion from the USDA as to who can access or receive the student's eligibility information and eligibility status, and records, if any, can be disclosed to and whom those records can be disclosed. Based on the facts and circumstances above, the Office of Internal Audit will temporarily suspend the plan to start this special review of the verification process until an opinion is obtained from the USDA. I have been in contact with our legal counsel, and they said they are expecting to get something from the Chicago office. There was no timeline given, but that's where we stand right now. So, Madam Chair, this completes the internal auditor's report.
Question. What's the issue? Is it under the federal law? Is a school employee ineligible for free lunch?
And it's their income. It's not federal law. Income.
I can understand that, Dr. Harris, but what you said was that you found out, somebody found out, that 2 administrators. Doesn't necessarily mean those administrators don't meet the income criteria.
Correct. These did not. The income on the application was not the correct income.
But they won't, so what won't they give you access to?
Could we ask our legal counsel
Yeah.
to comment on this? This is Wanda Lillis, who's associate legal counsel. Mr. Braverman is out of the district today. And Wanda's been working the last several weeks with us on this, and so we came prepared to talk about this because Carolyn shared with us that we were going to talk about it today.
Wanda, is there this privileged information or anything that we need to be cautious about?
Yes.
It is. It absolutely is. And that was one of the first things that we looked at from a legal standpoint. In terms
No, I mean our
of
conversation.
one of the things also is with respect to certainly no specific information, student information can be discussed. And that is clear, and that goes along with one of the things that we were looking at in terms of what information can be released. So we can discuss the issue in general, but not with respect to any kind of specific student information.
And if I may, the privileged information is related to anything that could be on the application itself.
I just wonder if
So
it's.
names,
Is that the property of the USDA? Is that why we're asking them?
Yes,
Okay.
it's a federal statute and regulation that we're trying to interpret.
Okay, gotcha.
Well, and the thing that we looked at first in terms of when the request was made for information was exactly what information could be released and to whom that information could be released, and then if kind of what can happen with that information. If a report is generated, then with whom can that information be shared, or that report. So what we then did is, because it is a federal statute, we looked to the U.S. Department of Education, or Agriculture, in terms of trying to get some guidance as to that information. Also to the Ohio Department of Education, seeking the answers of to whom can we share this information. There's really 2 pieces of information, one being the statute calls it eligibility information, which is the actual application that the parent completes. does contain name, social security number, household members, income, so very specific and personal information. The other piece then that is discussed in the statute is eligibility status, which is whether a student does in fact end up receiving free lunch, reduced lunch, or no benefit at all. The other thing that is in fact listed in the statute that we've been cautious of is that there is criminal penalty for misuse of the information. Potentially $1,000 fine, up to 1 year imprisonment for misuse or missharing of the information. So that's why we've been extremely cautious in terms of looking at exactly what can be shared.
Do you want to share the letter that we've actually?
I can. Would you like me to share the memo? Here's a memorandum that I drafted, putting together based on the conversations that we had with these individuals and based in fact on the information that was sent to us. We did receive some information back by email, such as the eligibility manual for free reduced lunch. So based on the information, conversations that we had, what I then drafted was a memorandum kind of laying out our questions that we had, and based on the conversations and informations we had, the conclusions that we had reached. And then forwarded that on to the USDA and also to ODE to get their response, to have them review it and in fact see if we were on track and accurate with that. So we did receive a response back from the USDA yesterday afternoon, indicating that the Midwest Regional Office, which is actually their Chicago office that we've talked with before, will be in touch with us since they've been more involved on the details of the case with the email. They have the proper materials and they would be in touch with us. So what we are waiting on now is a response from the USDA.
I have a really stupid question. If access is so limited, how did we find out about the two principals? And why did that, how did that get to their files?
My understanding is that we found out about the first principal based on a telephone call.
Right, but I guess I asked my question inartfully. Yeah, so somebody looked,
Yes.
you see what I'm saying? Somebody looked at that file who wasn't.
Yes, Joe Brown, Director of Food Service, has indicated that I believe it's the food service managers, do have access to knowing whether in fact students receive a free or reduced lunch. So there is someone in the building, principals as well.
And that was released.
Well, and if I may, the statute is very, very clear in saying that the program operator, who would be Joe Brown in this case, has the authority to have access to it and then can grant access to a very limited number of people who are involved in the day-to-day implementation of the program. And the statute is very clear in saying day-to-day implementation. And so those individuals that are, in the food service department working with this data on a regular basis can have access to it. And then Joe Brown himself, and that's about it, really, based on what the
So no one
statute.
can audit the information? That seems, I mean, I hate to criticize the government, but it seems like they would set something in place where you could audit.
And
There
And
is.
that is what we're looking into.
Exactly.
I mean, we believe that based on what we've read, that it may be permissible to audit, but we're just trying to get clarification on that.
So for instance, the language that Ms. Littles is talking about right now, it basically says that the program operator may grant approval to a list of, for access to the data for a list of different activities. And one of those activities is auditing purposes. And that's what we're seeking to get better clarification on to make sure that we're reading it correctly because of how restrictive it's written. Because it doesn't say that you have open access to it. It says that you may grant someone access to it. And then it's a part of what we, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, but that provision I'm just speaking of is also restricted to those who have day-to-day activity or, responsibility for the program. And so the question is, does our internal audit have day-to-day auditing responsibilities over the program?
Well,
doesn't have day-to-day responsibilities over auditing any program every day. I mean,
Yeah, and so that's where you get into, okay, are we,
On that particular.
yeah,
And the other piece that we're looking at is if she does, if she's able to obtain the information and conduct an audit, generate a report, then what information could be shared out of that report? It's certainly possible that aggregate data can be shared as long as it doesn't disclose the identity of any student, as long as identity can't be deduced. But when you talk about specific students, then that's what we believe cannot be re-released from the report, so.
right, we're not talking about students, and, I mean, I hate to say this, these principals, one I think is still under investigation, the other's resigned. I mean,
But we are talking about
we know who those
students.
kids
I mean,
are.
it's-
I mean, we've already released that for at least 2 employees.
Yeah, where are the students coming out?
But this is all really to conducting the audit, where apparently the formulation is that you're gonna match the students on the list to the names of the employees of the school district.
It really won't be the students that we're looking to.
Well,
It'll eventually, because,
but that's how you get there, is you'll compare the names.
because if I may, your request was that you wanted to compare the free and reduced price lunch information with the staff records. And so that student and reduced price lunch information came from the application. And the application under the statute and regulation is the eligibility information that they're referring to in the statute. And it's very clear in the regulations that really only 3 entities can have, that information can be disclosed to. The program operator, the comptroller of the United States, and any state, federal, state, federal, or local law enforcement agent.
Can I ask this? Why couldn't Joe do the comparison?
Yes.
That is-
I get,
You
pardon?
can't.
Yeah, okay.
And then the question becomes,
Who can you
what
turn it over
information,
to?
right,
Okay,
what
all right.
information can he then share?
Correct.
Is he doing that?
Yes.
Oh,
Started that even before this request was made. Because that was something we decided.
So you're
that
talking
needed to
about
happen.
turning over the results of his audit over to the internal, that's what you're asking about?
Well, the request we received from the internal auditor was not of what work product Joe created. It was the actual access to the application information.
Yes.
I don't think we need that.
Unless we misunderstood your
yeah,
request.
my instructions that I received was for the Office of Internal Audit to conduct
Yeah.
this review.
Right.
Well, I think that's ideal, but if the regulations prohibit it, are you gonna wait 60 days for the USDA to get back to you? Go ahead and do your own darn audit by food service manager, and then, wait for them to tell you who you can release that to.
Well, again,
The
according
auditor
to the,
doesn't have to do
Well,
that.
I think the only potential problem with that, I'm not saying that would happen, is that the people in charge of the program are auditing their own program. I mean, I think that's,
Yeah, that's.
like you said, it's not an ideal situation, and we don't, I mean,
This could be-
There's one person looking at the list, that's Joe. I don't, for an initial review, I'm fine if you wanna wait and then have, Carol go in and check and see if Joe's name's on the list, that's great, but don't wait 60 days to do that. You got the information.
so,
And the other piece of this is, once you compare the list, the regulations then talk about verification for cause. So if you have reason to believe there is some type of inaccurate information on the application, the person shouldn't be receiving the benefit, you can then go in and verify that individual person's information. And then there's also a process in the regulations that specify how that has to occur as well. So that's the second step of this, once you've looked at the information.
Yeah, no, I get that, because you're not gonna wanna have Joe check on people's income.
right.
I get that, but that's, in the meantime, you come up with a list of 2, you come up with a list of 3, whatever it is. And wait for the USDA, and then you can quickly move once it's turned over to Carol.
This may seem off the wall, but I'll play the dissident here. in a sense, and I fully respect what we're doing in section, but these issues came to light, there are two individuals, action is being taken. Okay? Do we have a responsibility to, because this sort of unique circumstance arose, to go through and do the check of everyone else? I mean, we have to consider relations of employees. Is this really a misuse of school funds? No. This is potentially a misuse of federal funds,
Right.
because that's who's paying for, right?
Isn't that worse?
Okay, what's that?
Isn't that worse?
But is it our responsibility, Rob? I mean, if the vets want to do it, I think that's fine. Okay, I'm just asking, is this really,
I think
Is
we have
it-
a fair
is
amount of
there a benefit-
responsibility if we want to participate in the program. Ultimately, you're right, but I think, you know, we're using millions of dollars of this federal program. I think it's in our best interest. If the food service manager is allowed to do it, why wouldn't you do it? It says in the regs, he can audit it. Why wouldn't you? Obviously, somebody way back when thought about it.
I guess I just have another stupid question. I mean, I kind of think like, well, so we can audit it and we can find it out, but we can't tell anyone about it.
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
Again, it can be the eligibility information or the eligibility status can be released to the U.S. Comptroller General and law enforcement agencies for prosecution purposes, of course. And to the U.S. Comptroller General, for the same reason I think Mr. Puccio was talking about, or I'm sorry, Mr. Davis is talking about, the federal government would then take action, you know, on behalf of the government and on behalf of that program if there was wrongdoing.
From an employee relations standpoint, to your point, I mean, because I do think you can make it the scope argument, like, is it fair to go in and say, we're only gonna look at this group of people? It's not really an audit, you could say that. Before the investigation started, were employees notified that this investigation, like, if I'm an employee, I know that sounds strange, but if you were on the list, no, you wouldn't notify them, you wouldn't say?
If there's suspected fraud, why do you, you can notify them, but you don't have to.
Okay.
I mean, that's a federal program, it's the district's records. You know, doesn't the district monitor email?
but,
And they tell people, I'm sure, I'm sure they're signing the thing, that they can monitor your email, but may not. You don't notify anybody.
Okay.
well, I'm for the, obviously, private sector, and I realize we're in a totally different environment.
Yeah,
But the
it's a good
response,
point.
but the response there to somebody falsifying or misrepresenting the expense report is not to audit everybody's expense reports. It is to strengthen the controls. And you send a message out to everybody that under the penalty of death, okay, if we, as we do routine type reviews of expense report information, all right, you better not be caught falsifying. You don't go through, this is, guys, I'd be hustling. I don't know if this is not kind of an overreaction, but
I don't
we're
think it is at all.
we're in a different environment.
Once you're notified of fraud,
By
you have
those
an
individuals.
obligation to react.
To the fraud that occurred, Bob, and
Yeah,
take
but-
steps to prevent it. That doesn't necessarily, I don't believe, again, I don't know this, all right? That you have to say because that this one person is representative or could possibly be representative of the population, but.
Well, you bring up a point that I don't think I asked Carolyn when we talked about this on the phone, and I think you clarified it when you were making your initial statement today. Is there a way to audit the controls or to review the controls without, and the answer to this may be no, without having access to the data that we're talking about? I mean, is that a step that at least could be taken while we're waiting on, you know, this information? Just, yeah. And I don't know how deeply you would have to go into the family information to actually audit the controls. I just don't know that.
We can audit the controls. What I have done in the meantime is talk to the Auditor of State to let them know, you know, when they come in, would they be willing to sit down with us and give us some ideals to how to prevent this in the future, you know. Yeah, we can go in and we can look to see, you know, what controls, is there anything that we can put on the application? But really what it comes down to, and at least in the one situation, everything was filled out correctly. They just put down an incorrect salary.
Sure.
And the only way that that was determined was by, you know, that tip coming in, pulling that application, having access to the salary information, and then seeing, okay, this is not correct. And I believe, I don't have it in front of me, the application says, under perjury of law when you sign this, so that.
So it's just, you know, a thought, but, you know, I hear what you're saying, and, you know, probably unfair to ask that here, because it sounds like I didn't ask you that when we were talking on the phone, but just a question of whether or not there is another level of review that can happen that would be beneficial to us in the food services department, you know, until we get this information.
We can talk, I mean, depending on how much time we want to spend here, talking to some of the other, previous to the way that it's being done now, I believe that the applications come, I don't know if anybody can clarify this, directly to food service, and they're scanned in. Prior to that, they were reviewed by the principals.
Right.
Who, there would be some knowledge of, possibly, some knowledge of, you know, this is a colleague's child. And that could have been an alert that way.
And all I'm asking is, you know, I'm not asking for a review here, but I'm just saying, is that something that we ought to look into, just reviewing the controls?
Oh,
That's all.
I would agree with, you know, definitely redoing the control. But at this point, I just wanted to point out, you know, that what I was asked to do and what I can do are, there is that scope limitation. We are waiting for the USDA. I initially thought, from the way that I read the regulations, that the internal auditor would have had immediate access, but there was some question about that, so that's where we stand today.
Is there anything else, Wanda?
Don't believe so.
And if I could just, you know, Mr. Davis, I definitely respect your, you know, your point of view.
Yes.
You need to put
You know,
something
I-
on his name today.
I sent out a lot of information about, you know, tone on the top. And because these are, you know, leaders, you know, the one, the investigation is complete, the one is ongoing, we don't know how that's gonna turn out. And that the anonymous tip that came in to the Office of Internal Audit for the first situation, you know, the person was like, you know, this is a principal, and there are, you know, this is supposed to be a leader in the community, and, you know, so I do feel that, you know, there is a responsibility for our leaders to lead by example. And if our own, you know, employees, you know what your salary is, and you intentionally mistake that, I do believe that if we can identify that and address it, the district will be better off.
And I, as superintendent, certainly don't disagree. That's why we acted swiftly once we got the information from you, because that's how I found out about the information. So we took direct action.
Absolutely.
So we have no qualms about that
Absolutely.
at all.
Excuse me, I didn't
Okay.
And I believe that the maintenance of the standards of the town at the top were certainly fulfilled by the direct action that you took when this came to light. And that warning clearly should be heard by all of the principals out there,
And
that this will not be tolerated.
Principal issue.
Or, well, or whoever, whatever school employee, whatever it is. But again, I'm gonna go back and say, I'm not sure, and not sure, that school funds are at risk. This is a federal fund issue and a contract between that person and the federal government, not what comes to schools. Okay?
We get reimbursement based on, yeah.
Well, I know, but,
Right.
but Dr. Harris, the cost, that first child would have eaten anyway. So the cost is gone. It's really just the revenue side, how much you get reimbursed. And that was ineligible, and that reimbursement came from the feds. Didn't come the school district didn't subsidize that person, the feds did. Okay? And I just don't know, again, it's ultimately a board decision, but, and Dr. Harris, your call, but the reaction of going out and auditing everybody, because what do you stop? You stop with you're gonna do this for every school employee?
When you're aware of fraud, why wouldn't you?
Well, because Bob, I honestly, I don't appreciate necessarily the difference, other than the fact that, you know, you're in a class house here, okay, and all that, but then there becomes a sort of a responsibility. You go through and do this, do you then have to publicize to everybody before we did this thing, and everybody's clean?
Yeah, the question
Again,
is
in the
whether
private
you do it or
sector,
the Fed does it.
Well, but my guess is that they won't do it.
Yeah, that's not my
either.
guess at all.
I don't know, I guess I'd like to sort of find out whether, that'd be a good, maybe thing to find out as you're
Yeah.
dealing with the feds, is what would their reaction be with any individual school district that encountered this situation? And, in my case, if in fact they said, well, no, we're gonna deal with it on a legislative basis, and we would not require you to go through and do this. Now, if they say that they're gonna audit everybody, let them do it. So again, I don't want to be speaking up out of turn, guys. I'll be quiet now.
Madam Chair, that completes my report.
All right. And now we're down to the update. This is a follow-up to the last meeting. Members will recall we had a presentation that was a recap of things we had been presented before, and there was going to be put online the implementation plan, as well as a high-level timeline. The high-level timeline is this. It's available on the website, as well as the implementation plan. I have requested that we actually receive something a little more, for lack of a better term, date-ish, that sort of committed us to when we were going to accomplish some goals for the project, so that the committee, when we receive a report, I think the next report will be in August, has something to hold the district accountable to.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and as you've already alluded to, if everyone recalls at the last Audit Accountability Committee meeting, Mr. Hoff was here to give an overview and status report, and at that time he mentioned that there would be a high-level timeline chart available the next day after that meeting, and the implementation plan as well would be online. And so I brought that here today, not for us to go over it, but just to validate that information was put online the next day and is available to you and the public to review at your leisure. Here this afternoon, at the request of the chairwoman, Ms. Van Dyke is here to give us a little bit of a deeper dive, a deeper dig, if you will, into the project activities and tasks, and also to give an overview of the project finances at this point in time for phase 1 of the project, which you see on the timeline. So, Ms. Van Dyke.
All right, I'm going to quickly run through, just to do a couple of reminders. Another thing that came up the last time was the accountability of the project, now that Rod's gone. So like Dr. Stanford said, I'm just going to talk quickly about the project accountability, and then we'll talk about the project plan, and then also the project budget. Accountability has not changed one bit since Rod left, with the exception of I am now the project manager, and someone from my group, Chris Campbell, is taking some of my responsibilities while I'm in this interim role, so he will be taking over the technology piece. So pretty much we have the same play as Columbus City Schools, Tyler Technologies. We have independent consulting groups, Davidson and SSI. And the reason I just kind of want to highlight that is because Davidson and SSI are